हे गाइस, मेरा नाम डॉक्टर शरण है और आप सबका स्वागत है मेरे इस YouTube चैनल में जिसका नाम है नीट बडी, जहां पर हम आप लोग की नीट प्रिपरेशन में थोड़ी बहुत हेल्प करते हैं बाय प्रोवाइडिंग यू विद डेली बायोलॉजी एमसीक्यूज, नीट preparation tips and tricks. And now we have started with lecture videos to help you out in clearing your concepts and remembering the diagrams of NCERT Biology. We call this lecture series NCERT Diagram Revision, where we are providing you with all the diagrams of one of the chapters of NCERT Biology and explaining them and trying to make you remember the diagram and explain concepts through those diagrams. We have covered digestive system, and today we're going to start with respiratory system. So without wasting much time, let's get started.
So this is the first diagram of the respiratory system और इस diagram में आपको पूरा का पूरा respiratory system दिख रहा है, especially the lower respiratory tract. Upper respiratory tract का पूरा portion यहाँ पे demonstrate नहीं किया है. So your respiratory tract starts from your nostrils, that is your exterior or the opening of the respiratory tract, that is your nostrils or the nose. Nostrils के बाद हमारे पास आता है nasal cavity. नेजल कैविटी जैसा हमारा माउथ के बाद ओरल कैविटी था डाइजेस्टिव सिस्टम में, रेस्पिरेटरी सिस्टम में नॉस्ट्रल के बाद वी हैव नेजल कैविटी. द नेजल कैविटी ओपन्स इनटू योर pharynx. What is pharynx? Right, pharynx is the common pathway of both air and food. However, there is a difference over here between the digestive and the respiratory tract. मतलब ये कि pharynx के तीन पार्ट होते हैं, that is your nasopharynx, your oropharynx and your laryngopharynx, right? So pharynx air moves through nasopharynx, then through oropharynx and finally through laryngopharynx as well. लेकिन food सिर्फ oropharynx के through travel करता है. Fine. So nasopharynx air हमारा nasal cavity से nasopharynx में जाएगा, then it will go to oropharynx, then to laryngopharynx and from laryngopharynx it will enter the larynx. Fine. Larynx is your voice box where the vocal cords are present for production of sound. And larynx से आपका air जाएगा ट्रेकिया में, और ट्रेकिया के आगे का पूरा डायग्राम में रिप्रेजेंट किया गया है. ट्रेकिया के आगे क्या क्या चीजें आएंगी. सो टिल नाउ यू हैव टू रिमेंबर दिस इज द अपर रेस्पिरेटरी ट्रैक्ट दैट आई वाज टॉकिंग अबाउट एंड इट इज नॉट डेमोन्स्ट्रेटेड इन द डायग्राम. सो यहाँ पे एक स्पेशल स्ट्रक्चर प्रेजेंट है जो हमने डाइजेस्टिव सिस्टम में बात नहीं की, दैट इज योर epiglottis. Now biology में epi means before something, right? So epiglottis is before the glottis has occurred. Now what is glottis? The opening of larynx is known as glottis. What is opening of larynx is known as glottis. Fine. So opening of larynx is glottis and epiglottis is guarding this opening. So what happens is whenever food tries to enter into the respiratory tract, the first structure that it is getting exposed to is your epiglottis. And what will epiglottis do? It is a flap sort of thing. So it is a cartilaginous flap like this. Fine. So सामने की तरफ anteriorly we have trachea or our windpipe and posteriorly we have esophagus, and this is your what? Oropharynx. Fine. Just an illustrative diagram for you guys to understand. So oropharynx में हमारा food भी है, हमारा air भी है. Now air need to go over here and food needs to go into the esophagus. Now sometime what happens when we are swallowing, the food will try to go into the trachea as well because it's a common pathway. However, whenever food tries to go into the trachea, what happens? This is the epiglottis. Fine. So the epiglottis from its position comes and closes the trachea because of the weight of the food. So food is falling over here. Because of the weight of the food, epiglottis will change its position and it will close the trachea. And the food will have no other place to go but the esophagus. And so that way, by closing of the trachea, by closing the opening of the larynx itself, the epiglottis is protecting the respiratory tract and not allowing any food material to go into the respiratory tract. So we have trachea over here that I explained to you guys, and the trachea, what you guys will notice over here are these cartilages. These are incomplete cartilages. Means what? पीछे की साइड से, this is the anterior view that we are having. Anterior means सामने की तरफ से. So this is the anterior view that we are having, and when we are viewing the respiratory tract anteriorly, we see these cartilages. But these are incomplete cartilages like this. So पीछे की तरफ से अगर हम view करेंगे, पीछे की तरफ से there is this opening that is present. So incomplete cartilages are present throughout the trachea and the respiratory tract. And why is these cartilages required? These cartilages are required to prevent collapsing. Fine. To prevent collapsing. So we all know from the physics laws, whenever air is moving out of a space in a fast velocity, the pressure at that area decreases. So just imagine when air is exhaling out, when we are exhaling out the air, these respiratory tracts have tendency to collapse. Fine. These walls will try to move inside and collapse over each other. But these semicircular cartilages that are present over there, they're preventing this collapse from happening. So the patency of the respiratory tract is maintained. So we have the trachea. Trachea then divides into two parts. That is your two bronchuses. One is your left and another one is your right bronchus, and these are known as the primary bronchus. These primary bronchus then further divide to form secondary bronchus, then tertiary bronchus. After tertiary bronchus, we have our respiratory bronchuses or respiratory bronchioles, what we say. Bronchioles. We have our respiratory bronchioles, and finally we have our terminal bronchioles that lead to our alveoli. Fine. Now alveoli are what? Alveoli are small balloon shaped structures. Now these are not alveoli are not having any semicircular cartilaginous ring that we are talking about. Those rings are till our tertiary bronchi only, right? So these alveoli, they are not having any semicircular cartilaginous ring. So how do they prevent from collapsing? They prevent because of the presence of surfactant that the alveoli has. So it has a chemical substance over its surface which are called as surfactant, and these surfactant, they help in the respiratory exchange as well as they will prevent the alveoli from collapsing. So that is your entire respiratory tract for you guys. So where is respiratory tract? The entire lungs that we are talking about, where is this respiratory tract located? It is located in the rib cage, in the thoracic cavity. Fine. So the thoracic cavity is a airtight chamber, and the thoracic cavity can transmit its pressures and volume changes into the lung via the pleural membrane. So what is happening? The lung is covered by two membranes, if you see, the inner side of a membrane and outer side of a membrane. The outer membrane, it is in contact with the thoracic cavity. The outer membrane is in contact with the thoracic cavity, and inner membrane is in contact with the lungs. And between those two membranes, the inner and the outer membrane, we have pleural fluid. This pleural fluid maintains a negative pressure, and because of the negative pressure, there is a constant suction that is being created. So whenever the ribs or whenever the thoracic cavity that is present outside the outer membrane, it will move out. Along with it, the inner pleural membrane will also move out. Why? Because over here we are having a negative pressure, a suction is there. So whenever outer pleural membrane moves, the inner pleural membrane also moves, and whenever the inner pleural membrane will move, this pleural membrane is attached to the lungs. The lungs will also move out. So whenever the volume of the thoracic cavity increases, volume of thorax increases, या thoracic cavity increases, the volume of lungs will also increase. Volumes of lung will also increase. So this is a very important concept that every one of you should understand, and this is how the changes of the pressures are created, which helps in inspiration and expiration. This is the second diagram of NCERT textbook, and this is showing how the respiratory mechanism actually occurs, how we are able to inspire and expire. Now over here, if I'll explain you guys one process, you can automatically derive the second one. And I'm over here, I'm going to explain you the inspiration process, that is the diagram A. So remember one thing, whenever the volume increases, the pressure will decrease. Means we are having an inverse relation between volume and pressure. Now what did I say in the previous slide? I told you guys that if we increase the volume of the thorax, if we increase the thorax volume, then obviously our lung volume also increases. And why does that happen? That happens because our outer pleura is attached to thorax and inner pleura is attached to lungs, and there is a negative pressure between these pleuras. So we have outer pleura, we have inner pleura, and between them we have the pleural fluid, which is creating a negative pressure. So whenever outer pleura moves out, the inner pleura also moves out, and along with that the lungs will also move out and the volume of lung increases. So this is what is happening in inspiration. So during inspiration, the ribs and sternums, they are raised. Fine. when the ribs is raised and the diaphragm moves down, at that time obviously the volume of the thoracic cavity is increasing. Volume is increasing of the thoracic cavity, volume of the lung will also increase, and as soon as there is increase in volume of the lung, the pressure of the lung will fall, and as soon as the pressure of the lung falls below the atmospheric pressure, so as soon as the pressure of lung it becomes less than the atmospheric pressure, the air will start gushing in, the air will start coming into the lung. So this is what is happening in the respiratory inspiration process. Now exact opposite happens in the expiratory process. So in expiratory process, if we decrease the volume of the lung, the pressure in turn will increase, and as soon as the pressure of the lung increases and it becomes greater than the atmospheric pressure, so if the pressure of lung becomes greater than the pressure of the atmosphere, then the air will automatically move out. So how can we decrease the volume of the lung? By decreasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. And for doing that, we'll return the ribs and the sternum to its original position. The diaphragm will relax and return to its original position. And you can see, even in the diagram, these two, you can see that the volume in the B diagram of NCERT and the volume in the A diagram of NCERT, the B diagram is having less volume compared to A diagram. As soon as the volume will decrease, the pressure will increase, and as soon as the pressure increases, the air will be pushed out of the lungs. Air will be expelled out from the lungs. Now, one point that you need to note over here is what happens when diaphragm is contracted and what happens when the diaphragm is relaxed. Remember, whenever the diaphragm is getting contracted, it will come down. Fine. So it is like this. So just imagine a tight rubber band over here, that is tight rubber band that we have tied between two sticks. When we stretch the rubber band, what happens? The rubber band will come down, and when we will allow the rubber band to relax, it will go back to its original position. Fine. So that is what is happening with our diaphragm as well. Whenever the diaphragm contracts, it will come down, and whenever it relaxes, it goes back. So this question has been asked, which of the following is correct about inspiration? Diaphragm contracts or diaphragm relax, and there were many other options as well. So remember, in inspiration, I am writing it down for you guys. In inspiration, the diaphragm will contract. Fine. Diaphragm will contract and move down in inspiration. So that is the entire inspiration and expiration process for you guys. Very simple to understand. Just remember our basic chemistry law that volume is inversely related to pressure, and then you can derive everything out of this law. This is the third diagram of the respiratory system, and over here what you need to note are the partial pressures. That's a very important part of this diagram. So partial pressure, it has been provided in table format as well in the NCERT textbook. आप लोग ने यहाँ पे partial pressure सारे के सारे note करने हैं. So what is the partial pressure of oxygen in alveoli is 104 and carbon dioxide in alveoli is 40. All these are in millimeter of mercury. हम सिस्टमिक आर्टरी की बात करें, सिस्टमिक आर्टरी की जब हम बात करें, यहाँ पे ऑक्सीजनेशन हो गया है, सो दिस ब्लड वुड बी रिच इन ऑक्सीजन. सो अगर हम यहाँ की बात करें तो ऑक्सीजन इज हैविंग हाउ मच 95 एंड कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड इज 40. अब ये ऑक्सीजनेटेड सिस्टमिक आर्टरीज टिश्यूज में जाएगा और टिश्यूज इन ऑक्सीजन को यूज करेगा. सो अब जो यहाँ से डीऑक्सीजनेटेड ब्लड जाएगा सिस्टमिक वेन में, वहां पे ऑक्सीजन कम होगा और ये टिश्यूज जो उनका मेटाबॉलिज्म के बाद जो कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड निकला है वो ब्लड को दे देंगे. सो इसमें कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड ज्यादा होगा. सो इफ यू सी इन दिस table that has been given over here, the partial pressure of the oxygen is given as 40, which is less when compared to 95 millimeter of mercury which was there in the systemic arteries, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45, which is more compared to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide that was there in the systemic veins. अब ये deoxygenated blood जाएगा हार्ट में, हार्ट से लंग में जाके फिर से exchange होगा. 2 points that you note over here, that you need to note over here is, first, there is always a difference of partial pressure. Fine. A simple basic law of diffusion, that is, whenever the concentration is higher, that substance will move from higher concentration to लोअर कॉन्सेंट्रेशन। फाइन, सो वही चीज पार्शियल प्रेशर के साथ भी होगा। हायर पार्शियल प्रेशर वाली एरिया से लोअर पार्शियल प्रेशर वाली एरिया में हमारा गैस मूव करेगा। सो पार्शियल प्रेशर इज नथिंग बट रिप्रेजेंटिंग द कॉन्सेंट्रेशन ऑफ द गैस। फाइन, सो ऑब्वियसली जो हम एयर इनहेल करते हैं वो एल्विलाई में आएगा। सो एल्विलाई में पार्शियल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सीजन इज वेरी हाई क्योंकि ऑक्सीजन रिच एयर इनहेल किया है। सो फर्स्ट आई एम गोइंग टू शो हाउ ऑक्सीजन इज ट्रैवलिंग, देन आई विल शो हाउ द कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड एक्सचेंजेस occurring. So ऑक्सीजन 104 मिलीमीटर ऑफ मर्क्यूरी है। अब हमारा जो ब्लड आ रहा है वो डीऑक्सीजनेटेड ब्लड है और डीऑक्सीजनेटेड ब्लड में मैंने बताया 40। सो इफ यू सी 104 और 40 का ग्रेडियंट प्रेजेंट है, काफी बड़ा डिफरेंस है। सो हमारा इजीली ऑक्सीजन लंग्स में मूव इन कर जाएगा इनटू द ब्लड वेसल्स, और जब ब्लड वेसल्स में मूव इन करेगा तो हमारा ब्लड ऑक्सीजनेटेड हो जाएगा। ये ऑक्सीजनेटेड ब्लड पल्मोनरी वेन लेके जाएगा। Now remember this again, if the question comes, what is the partial pressure of oxygen in pulmonary vein? What is the partial pressure of oxygen in pulmonary vein? Then it is same as that of the systemic arteries. मतलब partial pressure of oxygen 95 millimeter of mercury रहेगा. And similarly it can be asked for pulmonary artery. Now pulmonary artery is carrying the deoxygenated blood. So partial pressure of oxygen in pulmonary artery would be 40 and of carbon dioxide would be 45. So that is a trick question that can be asked in NEET exam. क्योंकि आपके डायग्राम में कहीं भी partial pressure of pulmonary veins की बात नहीं की है. So partial pressure of oxygen in pulmonary veins is same as that in the systemic arteries, and in pulmonary artery is same as that of vein. ये आर्टरी और वेन कंफ्यूजिंग हो सकता है। सो रिमेंबर, जो भी आपके बॉडी में सिस्टमिक वेन सिस्टमिक आर्टरी में होता है उसका ठीक उल्टा पल्मनरी आर्टरी और पल्मनरी वेन्स में हो जाएगा। Fine. So the pulmonary vein is carrying oxygenated blood. That is, the partial pressure of oxygen in pulmonary veins is 95 milliliter of mercury. अब ये oxygenated blood heart pump करेगा tissues में. Fine. Tissues में obviously हमें oxygen चाहिए. So there is a partial pressure oxygen gradient that occurs, and this 95 millimeter of mercury will move into the टिश्यूज, और टिश्यूज ऑक्सीजन यूज करने के बाद जो ब्लड छोड़ेगा वहां पे होगा 40 मिलीमीटर ऑफ मर्क्यूरी ऑफ ऑक्सीजन। फाइन, अब ये 40 मिलीमीटर ऑफ मर्क्यूरी ऑफ ऑक्सीजन घूम के हार्ट में जाएगा, हार्ट से वापस लंग्स में, और लंग्स में फिर से वही ग्रेडियंट जनरेट होगा और एक्सचेंज होगा। इसका ठीक उल्टा कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड के लिए होता है। कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड में क्या होगा कि जो पल्मनरी आर्टरी आ रही है उसमें कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड ज्यादा है compared to the carbon dioxide of the alveoli. So if you see alveoli हमारा 40 है कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड और हमारा pulmonary artery में 45 है. So there is a difference that is present over here. So higher concentration to lower concentration move करेगा और कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड pulmonary artery से बाहर निकल के alveoli में चला जाएगा. So यहाँ पे when we say oxygenated blood is occurring, oxygenated blood is going to the heart, we mean that ऑक्सीजन का कॉन्सेंट्रेशन इंक्रीज हुआ है इसमें और कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड का कॉन्सेंट्रेशन डिक्रीज भी हुआ है। फाइन, सो द कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड कॉन्सेंट्रेशन डिक्रीजेस, ऑक्सीजन कॉन्सेंट्रेशन इंक्रीजेस, एंड अगेन द साइकिल continues. One point again that I want you guys to remember over here is the difference between the partial pressures of carbon dioxide and partial pressures of oxygen is huge. मतलब ये कि कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड 5 मिलीमीटर मर्क्यूरी के डिफरेंस में एक्ट कर रहा है और यहां पे अगर आप देखेंगे ऑलमोस्ट 64 मिलीमीटर ऑफ मर्क्यूरी का पार्शियल प्रेशर डिफरेंस एग्जिस्ट कर रहा है। व्हाई इज इट सो? रीजन ये है कि कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड इज मोर सॉल्यूबल। क्योंकि ये मोर सॉल्यूबल है तो ये इजीली डिफ्यूज हो सकता है कंपेयर टू ऑक्सीजन। सो ये दो पॉइंट यहां पे आप लोग ने याद रखना है। फर्स्ट, पार्शियल प्रेशर डिफरेंस आपने हर जगह देखनी है। दूसरी चीज आपसे यहां पे पूछ सकते हैं पल्मनरी वेन और पल्मनरी आर्टरी में क्या क्या पार्शियल प्रेशर्स है, एंड फाइनली व्हाई देयर इज ओनली 5 मिलीमीटर मर्क्यूरी डिफरेंस इन द पार्शियल प्रेशर्स ऑफ कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड एंड व्हाई देयर इज as high as 60 millimeter of mercury of partial pressure difference in oxygen. This is the fourth diagram of NCERT respiratory chapter, and this diagram is just representing the membranes through which the exchange occurs. So remember, this respiratory exchange occurs through three membranes, or the membrane respiratory exchange membrane is made up of three layers. First is your epithelium. Epithelium is nothing but the lining of the alveoli. Find the squamous epithelium of the alveoli. जो ये आपको ग्रीन कलर के सेल्स दिख रहे हैं यहाँ पे, जो मैं ब्लैक पेन से हाईलाइट कर रहा हूँ, these are your respiratory epithelium. फाइन, ये सिंगल सेल्स है यहाँ पे, सिंगल सेल्स. फाइन, सो ये अगेन इंपॉर्टेंट है, सिंगल सेल है ये, सिंगल सेल. देन कम्स योर बेसमेंट मेम्ब्रेन. व्हाट इज द बेसमेंट मेम्ब्रेन? बेसमेंट मेम्ब्रेन इज नथिंग बट द सीमेंट. जो घर बनाते समय ब्रिक्स लगाते हैं, ब्रिक्स को चिपकाने के लिए क्या यूज करते हैं? सीमेंट यूज करते हैं. ब्रिक्स के बीच बीच में सीमेंट यूज करते हैं ना, बस वही वही. जो हमारे सेल्स है बॉडी में, दोज आर द ब्रिक्स ऑफ आवर बॉडी, राइट? सो ब्रिक्स को चिपकाने के लिए, सेल्स को चिपकाने के लिए वी रिक्वायर अ बेसमेंट, सीमेंटिंग मटेरियल. सो दैट इज योर बेसमेंट मेम्ब्रेन दैट इज प्रेजेंट ओवर हियर, or basement substance. So this yellowish thing that you're seeing in this diagram is nothing but the cementing material or the basement substance. And finally is the third layer, that is the endothelium. Fine. So remember the difference, that is epithelium first layer and third layer is endothelium. And endothelium is not different from epithelium. हर ऑर्गन की लाइनिंग को हम एपिथेलियम बोलते हैं एक्सेप्ट फॉर ब्लड वेसल्स. ब्लड वेसल्स की लाइनिंग को, lining of blood vessels is called as endothelium. So एक तरीके से आप बोल सकते हैं epithelium of blood vessels is nothing but endothelium, right? So ये डिफरेंशिएट करने के लिए कि हर जगह एपिथेलियम एपिथेलियम लिखे तो लोग कंफ्यूज हो जाएंगे. हर जगह कहीं पे भी एक्सचेंज होगा तो ब्लड वेसल के साथ ही एक्सचेंज होता है, इसीलिए ब्लड वेसल की एपिथेलियम को हम एंडोथेलियम बोलते हैं. फाइन. सो ये भी सिंगल सेल्ड है, और क्योंकि ये एंडोथेलियम कैपिलरीज की है, ऑब्वियसली कोई बड़ा आर्टरी आके एक्सचेंज नहीं होगा, यहाँ पे कैपिलरीज एक्सचेंज करेंगे. सो अगेन दिस इज ऑल्सो सिंगल सेल्ड लेयर. फाइन. सो इजीली डिफ्यूज हो सकता है, इट्स अ परमिएबल मेम्ब्रेन, इजीली परमिएबल मेम्ब्रेन. और यहाँ पे आपको तीन ये लेयर्स याद रखनी है. कौन कौन सी तीन लेयर्स हैं? फाइन. सो दोज थ्री लेयर्स आर योर, first is the epithelium, then comes the basement or the cementing material, and finally comes the endothelium or the epithelium of the blood vessels. And that is the complete exchange membrane through which your respiratory exchange occur. This is the fifth diagram of NCERT textbook, and this is an important one. इससे questions आते हैं. Oxygen dissociation curve. What does the left shift and right shift of this curve means? ये पूछा जाता है. So left shift मतलब ये curve ऊपर की तरफ चला जाएगा, left side में. That is the left shift that I drew for you guys. And right shift मतलब ये curve right side की तरफ आ जाएगा. Fine. This is the right shift. This is the left shift. अब left shift और right shift का मतलब क्या है? ऐसा होगा क्यों? So जब भी हमारा percentage of saturation improve होगा, increased hemoglobin, ऑक्सी हीमोग्लोबिन एक तरीके से आप बोल सकते हैं, इंक्रीज ऑक्सी हीमोग्लोबिन अगर बनेगा तो वो होगा हमारा क्या? परसेंटेज सैचुरेशन ऑफ ऑक्सीजन इज गेटिंग इंक्रीज. सो वहां पे आएगा ऑक्सीजन डिसोसिएशन कर्व मूविंग टुवर्ड्स लेफ्ट. और यही चीज अगर डिक्रीज होगा हमारा तो वो हो जाएगा हमारा मूविंग टुवर्ड्स राइट. सो क्या क्या कंडीशन है जो लेफ्ट वर्ड शिफ्ट कराएंगे, क्या क्या कंडीशन है जो राइट वर्ड शिफ्ट कराएंगे? सो रिमेंबर, अगर हमारा पार्शियल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सीजन ज्यादा होगा, या अगर हमारा पार्शियल प्रेशर ऑफ कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड कम होगा, या अगर हमारा H+ आयन का कॉन्सेंट्रेशन कम होगा, या फिर अगर हमारा टेम्परेचर कम होगा, सो ये सारी चीजें आपका लेफ्ट शिफ्ट कराएंगी. लेफ्ट शिफ्ट मतलब क्या? इट विल इंप्रूव द परसेंटेज सैचुरेशन, इट विल इंक्रीज द परसेंटेज सैचुरेशन. सो बस एक चीज याद रखना है, ऑक्सीजन, और उसका ठीक ऑपोजिट बाकी सब में हो जाएगा. फाइन. सो ऑक्सीजन अगर इंक्रीज होगा तो ऑब्वियसली आपको ऑक्सी हीमोग्लोबिन ज्यादा बनेगा. लॉजिकल, ऑक्सीजन इंक्रीज हुआ, ऑक्सी हीमोग्लोबिन हमारा ज्यादा बनेगा. सो ऑक्सी हीमोग्लोबिन ज्यादा बना मतलब लेफ्टवर्ड शिफ्ट हो गया. फाइन. सो जस्ट रिमेंबर, ऑक्सीजन इंक्रीज, लेफ्टवर्ड शिफ्ट, और उसका ठीक ऑपोजिट बाकी सब के लिए होगा. मतलब कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड शुड डिक्रीज, H+ ion concentration should decrease, and temperature should decrease. Now the trick that the NEET people can ask you over here is H+ ion concentration decrease मतलब pH increase. ये चीज याद रखना. ये मत सोच के चले जाना कि ऑक्सीजन इंक्रीज और बाकी सब डिक्रीज और वहां पे pH भी डिक्रीज करके आ गए. नहीं, pH increases क्योंकि H+ ion concentration डिक्रीज हो रहा है. सो रिमेंबर योर लॉजिक ओवर देयर. और ये चार चीजें ही याद रखना. वहां पे pH अगर आ गया तो आप H+ से डिराइव कर सकते हैं. H+ डिक्रीज होगा तो pH हमारा इंक्रीज होगा, और इन सारी कंडीशन में हमारा लेफ्टवर्ड शिफ्ट होगा। सो इसके ठीक ऑपोजिट में राइटवर्ड शिफ्ट हो जाएगा। मतलब अगर हमारा पार्शियल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सीजन डिक्रीजेस, कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड इंक्रीजेस, H plus ion concentration increases and temperature increases, all these will cause rightward shift, right shift of the curve. Simple to understand. अब बहुत सारे conditions आपने कोचिंग में पढ़े होंगे जो leftward और rightward shift कराएंगे, but these are the basic conditions that have been mentioned in NCERT, and you must know how the oxygen dissociation curve is changing with these concentrations and parameters that have been mentioned in NCERT.
So those were all the important diagrams of respiratory system and the concepts behind those diagrams. I hope you found this video helpful. I'll see you guys again in my next video where we will be explaining diagrams of next chapter of NCERT Biology, that is circulation and body fluids. Till then, all the best and keep working hard. Do like and share this video if you find it helpful, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new out there. Thank you guys for watching. Bye bye.